People may still be coming in, but we could go ahead and just begin. I think I'll just start by introducing myself. So I'm Jennifer Ciramoli. Some of you I know, some very well, some new faces too in the room. So welcome to the next 4 weeks that we'll be spending together. I'm the founder and CEO of Studio B, and we specialize in mindfulness, corporate mindfulness specifically. My background was in corporate sales. I sold wide area network infrastructure solutions for large enterprise companies. I did that for about 10 years, and then I experienced some significant symptoms of burnout, what I now know to be burnout. And after relocating here, after getting divorced, relocating here, and traveling quite a bit, I did end up leaving my my job as an account executive, and really decided to change my life because I was not well. I was physically about 20 pounds lighter than I am now, which wasn't a good thing, and mentally and emotionally completely drained. So I really decided to embrace yoga as a career path. It was something that helped me quite a bit. It kind of provided an anchor for me as I was going through all of that. But up until that point, the practice for me was very, very physical. I was kind of ignoring the deeper work. There was a part of me that felt intimidated by meditation. I didn't think at that point in my life that I had the capacity to slow down at all, and I really wasn't interested in it. So, but through the practices, I learned that I do have the capacity to slow down, and it's not only important but necessary in order to lead a balanced life. So I owned a yoga studio, Balance Yoga, for 6.5 years. I sold it in 2015. At that point in my life, it was a very good decision because there were a lot of personal and professional changes that were happening. And I really took a deep dive into studying mindfulness meditation specifically because it was what was most helpful for me. And I knew that if I was going to move down this road as a mindfulness teacher, that I really needed space in order to, and quiet, just to study and learn and practice. And honestly, the insight for the career path that I'm on now didn't come right away. It was in the midst of that deep work that I realized that everything that I had done up until that point was pointing me in this direction. And I saw it as a pathway to reach people that perhaps didn't feel comfortable or didn't have the time to go into a yoga studio and feel overwhelmed by what also could be delivered there, right? So I knew that I could teach these practices, which are very simple and easy to learn, but not always easy to maintain, in a way that wasn't intimidating and was very secularized and based on science. So everything we do here is evidence-based and helpful. And my hope is that it'll not only provide you with practices to use at home in a formal way, but also in your professional lives, in your interpersonal relationships, as you're navigating this world that we live in, which is often overwhelming. So I thought today that we'd just kind of go through what the next couple of weeks will look like. And we'll do that in just a minute. But I'm really curious to get your voices out into the room and hear just a little bit about you, whatever you want to share, just in a few words. That would be super helpful to me. So we'll just start with Gretchen.
Hi everyone. I'm Gretchen Hollis. I am head account manager at Studio B. Started working with Jenn last summer, and I'm also new to meditation journey. So I love to sit in on these classes and just get refreshed structures and build on the experience of mindfulness. Mindfulness was first brought in my realm in dealing with my 10-year-old son, who was experiencing some anxiety, and just I didn't know how to, watching him with this anxiousness just made me see it in a whole different light, because I've always had, you know, anxious feelings. So I, you know, did a Google search on how to deal with it, and came across Headspace, and so started working with him with that. And my background is in corporate sales as well. I did banking sales for over 10 years. So if I had these tools back then, I would have had a lot less sleepless nights and a lot less anxiety and stress. So, you know, just having these tools and resources and sharing them with people that you love and the people that you know is a great foundation. Yeah.
Thank you, Gretchen. We love working with Gretchen. It's been a lot of fun.
My name is Katie Lambert, and I'm most of you, I know everybody here. I'm the CFO of McCarthy Tire, so we run from New York all the way down to Georgia. Large company, 1,500 employees, lots of issues, growing and dealing with that. Well, I work for myself, you know, independent with my brother and I that run it. I was going 24/7, and everybody that knows me knows that I was in, you know, everything from, I started meeting at 7 in the morning, and I'd still be scheduling something at 7 at night.
Mm-hmm.
And I stopped and raised 3 children in the meantime, which I can appreciate where you are with, nobody wants you to come over and visit with your children. But I did all that, and then, you know, I really ramped up. I took the time to raise them, and then I ramped up a lot more after I did that. And then about 2-3 years ago, I started having some cardiac issues. So then health takes over, and you have to listen to whatever health tells you to do, and your doctors tell you to do, and they said you need to take a step back, you need to calm down a little bit. And I have the exact personality and medical conditions as my father, and I didn't bode well for him, so I realized the writing was on the wall, and I better, you know, step back. So while I still work 5 days a week, I cut back on a lot of extra things that keep me in the realm of working from 8 to 5. 9 to 4, I tell my doctor. But I'm supposed to this, and then when this opportunity came up, and I read a lot about it, and I thought I've never tried anything like this ever. And it sounds like something that might work for me. And from what you're telling me about your history, it might work for me.
Yeah, I think it will. I don't know anyone that it hasn't helped.
It's got to help me somewhere.
So, absolutely.
My name is Susan Shoemaker. I work for Riggs Asset Management, which is right across the street. And I'm an investment advisor. I started in the investment business in 1987. I worked in New York for 10 years and moved home, raised a family, 3 kids. So I have 21, 18, and 11. So that's kind of an interesting age gap and interesting, every kid is really an individual. So that's fun. And I try to be as involved in the community as I can be, which requires those, 8:30 meetings and 4:30 and 6:30 and 7:30 meetings. But I worked with Jenn. She came in. We were lucky enough that Riggs had her come in and do sessions. And I will say that you can take away from this a lot or a little, but it will definitely change your life. And I can tell you that I feel, I have some of the stuff. I don't think I mastered anything, but I think the most important thing is I can feel myself, a realization of where I am in terms of stress level, and I can shift myself and take a step back. And I think as women, we're always on go, and the foot is always on the pedal. And we just keep getting it done, and we never take the time. So it's giving me, I can't wait to see what the next step is for me within this process, because the first step has been amazing.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Pathfinder Castellano, and just like these two ladies, I'm having similar experiences. I'm the first of 9 in my family, and so was the one that had to keep going and kept going for 40 years or so, and was involved in corporate healthcare and lots of things in the community, and always on the go, always, and much like Katie had the same timeline. I started to step back a few years ago, and then my husband retired. And that brought a whole other and that's a whole other transition. And I have actually 8 grandchildren, 4 adult young women who are step-grandchildren, and then 4 little ones. And so life has just gotten very crazy. And again, so I really was looking for something, and I remember in college doing meditation and really gave up on it. I've not been exercising well, so in my health I began to realize is starting to suffer. So I too am looking for something to just kind of calm down and be able to say no sometimes to certain things.
Clear boundaries, yeah.
Hi, my name is Nell O'Boyle, and as we talked about, I have 3 kids, 12, 10, and 8. But I have been practicing real estate almost 20 years, Lackawanna County, and for the last 8 years have really ramped up that business since my last one was born, and decided to leverage whatever I could, and joined multiple boards and really haven't stopped. So about a year and a half ago, I opened up a real estate company. We opened up our 2nd branch this past year. We have 15 employees. And my job before that was absorbing my client's stress and kind of turning it into, a productive aspect of a deal. Now it's that as well as my agents and helping them and talking them off the ledge just as much as I do with my clients. So the stress level has definitely amplified, and I just find myself waking up in the middle of the night, and it's because I forgot to do something or whatever, and it has to stop because I feel like myself just am aging and I'm tired all the time.
Yeah.
And I know my friends that I mentioned that have gone on extreme retreats, it has changed them, and they are visibly different and happier and more productive. And they're professionals, and they've taken the time out to do it, and I think, why can't I? So this is my baby step.
You absolutely can. This is such a good step.
Yeah.
Very happy you're here.
Yeah, me too.
I'm Lindsay Griffin. I think I know most of you. I just met you, and I know we've met you before. But yeah, kind of similar. I think just really looking, and I tried to do this in the summer, the program, and I only made it to 1 because it was at 6 a.m.
It was
and I
really
didn't want to
early.
do it.
It was really early.
I said to myself this year, I really want to make that a big priority. So I was really excited about this. But I transitioned into this new career only about 4 years ago. So I'm kind of newer in my role, and I'm the COO of the chamber now, and it's been an awesome experience. And I think I was very, motivated, and I am still super motivated. But I think I want to find a really good balance of also taking care of myself. I think I probably didn't do a good job at that, and I went through a bad divorce about 2 years ago, and that was something too that I think I'm still working, to get back on track with my personal life, and maybe haven't paid as much attention to myself in that way. So I think this year I want to do that, and so I'm excited. I'm going to come to all of these and fun with
That's awesome.
So
That's awesome. You just have to leave,
Yes.
right? You just have to
Yes.
leave, because it's hard. That's the hardest part. Hello, welcome. Thank you for being here. It's okay. So even if you're late, just come, right? It doesn't matter if you're a half hour late. I don't care. Christine won't care. Okay?
Excited to learn all of it.
Hello.
Hi, my name is Kathy Reckert, and my entire life is in flux right now. I retired from my business about a year and a half ago, and I can't stand not working. It's driving me crazy. So I'm in the process of getting my resume together and hitting the pavement again. I'm in the middle of a divorce, which is also adding to, I recently left my husband and I moved out. I apologize.
We're all here.
So, I'm just it's been just a few weeks, so I'm just getting used to all that entails, and so I'm interested in moving forward, and not backwards, and just looking for ways to do that. And I want to have grace in class as I move forward with this. I don't want it to turn out to be one of these couples that scream and yell in public and just, I also have a 24-year-old daughter, so I don't want to make this hard for her either. I want her to feel welcome in both of our homes, and so that's my story.
You've got a lot of talent, so I know you can do this, yeah. A lot of talent, a lot of talent, a lot of intelligence, yeah.
Thank you so much.
And Grace, I see it.
All right, thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Hello, welcome.
Hi.
We were just going through some short introductions. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm Ida Castro, and I'm really happy to be here.
I'm so happy you're here. Thank you for coming. I'm Jennifer Saramboli, and this is Gretchen Wallace, and we both work at Studio B. So we're thrilled to be here with all of you. So the format, so the agenda, if you open up your folders, we just created a short agenda so that you know what's ahead, all right? I will be teaching the first 2 sessions, and Christine and I will be co-teaching the second 2 sections. Today is really just laying a foundation. So every session will be very experiential, which that means it will include practices that will be supportive and easy to learn. And everything that we teach you in these sessions will also be supported by access to our e-learning platform. So you can see that Alex is here, he's recording us. He did not record any of that, just so you know. And he won't be recording any of you. So essentially, I'll be recorded so that you can drop back into the lecture, the talk. You could drop back into the practices at any time if you'd like to. Also, that means if you can't make it, if something comes up and it's absolutely impossible for you to get here, you can log into the portal. The video will be up 24 to 48 hours we need in order to load the video, because we just go through a quick cleanup and edit with it, and then it's loaded onto the platform. Additionally, we also load supportive materials into the platform that will support the themes or lessons that we're teaching in each section. So although this is a similar path to that of our corporate clients, the material's different in that we've created this especially for you. We've taken pieces out of our signature mindfulness training experience, which is what Susan was referring to earlier. But that flow and format is different than what you'll experience here. So this will be, the intention behind doing this with all of you is that I know how busy you all are and how you are constantly being pulled in a zillion different directions. That would absolutely define my life at the moment as well. So I want to make the most of this time together. Okay? We are accessible to you at any point. You could reach me through email with questions. You could text me. I'll give you my cell phone number, so that's easy. I don't like answering the phone because it's typically a telemarketer. So texting's the best way, and then we can schedule a call. Does that sound good to everyone? Okay, awesome. All right, so we're going to get started with a practice. It's going to be a very simple, easy practice. I'll guide you through it. This will just ground some of the energy in the room and prepare you for feeling more attentive as we get into the presentation. Once we get through the practice, we'll take a minute. You guys can grab some food, and you're welcome to eat while I'm talking. Sound good? Mm-hmm. All right. So I'm just going to put your purse down if that's okay. I'm going to use this chair. So I'd like to invite each of you to just push your chair away from the table enough that you feel a little more spacious.
I think that takes us up a little bit,
Yeah, be
bring it
careful
down.
over there. You don't have to go too far away.
We're good, yeah.
And then if your spine will allow, so does anyone have a spinal injury or issue that's causing discomfort? Okay, if you do and you don't want to talk about it in front of the group, just come see me afterwards. We're not going to be doing movement, but I just want to make sure you feel supported in your seat. Okay? So if you feel comfortable, just come to the middle or edge area, the front area of the seat, and uncross the legs if they're crossed, rounding your feet. So just really dropping your feet down into the floor, and just bring your hands down onto your lap. So not crossing the hands or touching the hands. And then I'd like to invite each of you to close your eyes if that feels okay. If you'd rather keep your eyes open, you could take the gaze forward and just gently soften the gaze. And just bring your attention now to your feet. And you might even wiggle your toes just to feel your feet in your shoes. Your toes in your shoes. Notice them wiggling against the floor. And then invite stillness into the feet. And notice the weight of the feet here. See if you can encourage a heaviness in the feet. Just really landing through the heels. Imagining the feet feeling heavier now. And now bring your attention into your seat. Noticing your body sitting in the chair. Feeling into your sit bones landing and grounded. Your legs landing and grounded. And notice that the body's very supported right now. You could invite the sound of the bells in. You don't have to push the sound away. In fact, invite the ears to open up and invite the sounds of life happening around us in to this very moment. And now returning your attention into the body for a moment. Noticing the support of the chair, of the room, of this space that we're sharing together. Imagine now your spine, so bringing your attention there. And feeling the nobility and dignified nature of the spine. Notice how the spine is reaching up through the crown of the head. And you can even encourage a gentle reaching up through the crown of the head. And notice if that created any space inside. I'd like to invite each of you to look closer at the breath, moving in and out. See if you could name how the breath is right now. Just one word. There's no need to change the breath. So just inviting this experience of looking at the breath just as it is. The breath turns in and the breath turns out. So trusting that the body breathes. Whether or not we're paying attention, the breath moves in and the breath moves out. And see if you could just relax in that for just a moment. That rhythm of the breath. Bringing your attention back into the body, back into this space, this seat, fully supported. You could gently tip your chin down towards your chest and encourage the eyes to open and invite the light of the room back into the space. Come back into this circle that's been created together. So just a few minutes there. We were probably, I didn't time it, but we were probably in our meditation about 6 minutes, which is a really lovely chunk of time. So you could sit and meditate for 6 minutes. And we could notice how there's just a subtle shift. Right? The mind, 6 minutes, actually anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes is a wonderful place to start for a beginner. And even with just a 3-minute practice, we could start to see that subtle shifting of things kind of settling down. A teacher I worked with for many years, his name is Biff Midhofer, very wise, wonderful teacher, very kind. And he used to tell a story of a monk that was sitting in his kitchen and his granddaughter came in. And the granddaughter was thirsty for apple juice. So the monk stood up and he made fresh apple juice for his little granddaughter. And he brought the juice over and he handed it to his granddaughter and she said, "Oh, Grandpa, I don't want to drink that juice. It looks like it has all kinds of things floating in it, right? It's dark and murky." And she saw all the, you've seen fresh apple juice before. It doesn't necessarily look very appetizing. And he said, "Oh, sweet child, it's okay." And he sat the juice down and she went out to play. And the stillness of the glass, of course, allowed all of the textures to settle into the bottom of the glass. And the little girl came back in a few minutes later and she looked at the juice again and she said, "Oh, Grandpa, I would like to drink that juice now. It's clear and beautiful." Right? And so we could think of just that illustration as what happens in the mind when we enter stillness. So often we go into this space of quiet and stillness and things are really crazy, right? The mind's really busy, you know, and often what I hear most from beginners is that, as a matter of fact, somebody I work with said, you know, I sit on my own, things are good here with you, but then I go and sit on my own and it's like a circus in there. And I don't want to be at the circus, right? And so we constantly trying to kind of push it away or calm things down or force it. And really that's not what meditation is. It's allowing things, the reality of what's happening right now to be here. So soon we learn that the thoughts can be there and we don't have to push anything away. We don't have to push the sounds of the clock chiming in, right? What might be a glaring distraction in the beginning just becomes a cloud in the sky moving through this spacious and clear and beautiful blue sky, right? So we'll get more into this in a minute, but great job with your first meditation. Why don't we break for a moment and grab some food, and I'll get the presentation ready. So I'm going to get started. So I wanted to just start by giving you some definitions. Like, just let's talk about these words. Let's make sure that you're clear on what mindfulness actually means. And so I like to refer back to Jon Kabat-Zinn. Does anyone know who he is? Jon Kabat-Zinn? Okay, great. Jon Kabat-Zinn created the MBSR method, so mindfulness-based stress reduction, which is a Western, he's a psychologist, and he studied very traditional practices and then came back to the United States with them. And this is all kind of happening in the late 60s, early 70s. So he worked at the University of Massachusetts and had been transformed by traditional Vipassana practices or mindfulness meditation practices. And he said, I really believe that I can pull the spirituality out of these practices, secularize them, and then study them. And he believed wholeheartedly that they would be very impactful to his patients that really needed them. So he developed this method, MBSR, which has now been widely accepted and used in Western psychology and in therapy and counseling, and also just as a method in and of itself. So you could go to an 8-week MBSR class and learn these techniques and practices. And so very similar to how we teach mindfulness over an 8-week period. However, back then, because he wanted to really understand the data, the evidence of these practices, he formed the trainings in MBSR in a very specific way so that he could test it. And he went back to the hospital, and he went to all of the other doctors in this psychiatric hospital, and he said, and he had a small room, the story goes, he had a small room in the basement of this hospital, and he went to all the other doctors and he said, I want you to give me your hopeless cases. Give me the worst, like the people that you don't think you could help. Send them to me. I want to test this method. And they did. And he had phenomenal results. Transformative results. And that's how MBSR was grown. So MBSR is a fantastic way to practice. However, remember, he created in a way that it could be tested. So he taught that you had to meditate 40 minutes in the morning and 40 minutes in the evening and follow this kind of pathway in order to get results. That was 40 years ago, 50 years ago almost, right? That's hard to believe. And what we know now through the westernization of these practices is that just 3 to 5 minutes a day is extremely impactful from a neurological perspective. So that's really transformative. So yes, you can practice 40 minutes twice a day. There's many colleagues that I have that have been trained in MBSR and teach it that way. I've been trained in insight meditation. And insight meditation practices, which is based in very traditional practices as well, is much more flexible. So we follow the science and the evidence that we've gathered over the last 20 years specifically, which include over 5,000 studies on the neurological and neuroscientific benefits of mindfulness meditation. So again, all of these practices are evidence-based. But I love this quote, and he says, the best way to capture your moments is to pay attention to them. Right? I have 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls, and I'll never forget my oldest daughter, Sophia. We were at the Steamtown Mall, and this is back when it was still a mall, so she was little. She was about 5, probably. She's turning 16 next month. And we were shopping, getting ready for Christmas, and you all know what the holidays are like for busy mothers, working mothers, right? They're crazy. And so often we're just hustling through and not paying attention to these precious moments that are available to us. And I was having one of those days. So I was rushing through the mall on the 2nd floor, and I was dragging my kids around, and I was certainly stressed. And Sophia stopped, dead in her tracks, just stopped. And she said, "Mommy, look at that." And I paused for a moment with her, and I didn't see what she was looking at. We were, you know how there's that 2nd floor and you could oversee everything. And I said, "Sophia, what? What are you talking about?" And I was probably terse with her. She said, "Mommy, how don't you see that?" And I stopped with her, and I looked up, and right in front of us was this magnificent Christmas display, gigantic, hanging in the middle of the mall, right in front of us, and I didn't even see it. And so often we move through life that way, not paying attention to the beauty that's all around us and the opportunities for connection. And that connection is what makes us feel alive. So mindfulness is very impactful, not just for these inner workings, but for this human connection, which we really need to thrive and be happy. This picture was taken in 2014 when my oldest son graduated high school. And he's going to be 24 this year, which is crazy. But does anybody recognize where this might be from? A local amusement park? Knoebels. Yeah. And I remember standing there, and I remember looking at it, and I took this picture, and I remember how I was feeling in that moment. And it was just so overwhelming and emotional with my first child graduating high school, leaving for college. And when I looked back at the picture, I said, that's exactly what my life felt like in that moment. Now remember, 2014 was the year before I sold my yoga studio. So again, things had ramped up. I know that. I'm a very type A, busy person. I like to work. I love my job. I love my work. And I will work myself into the ground. And if I'm not paying attention, life could feel like this rather quickly. So at this point, I had been practicing yoga for 15 years, right? I had been practicing mindfulness meditation for about 5 years. I was well into knowing that I needed to catch these inner workings that propelled me forward, right? But it could still happen, that's the point. right? So mindfulness, these daily practices, whether we're practicing in a formal way or informal way, it's not the perfection of us that we're looking for. We're still going to get caught up, and we're going to still get really busy, and we're going to still feel stress. In other words, it doesn't make the stress go away. It just helps us meet the stress in a much healthier way. So when we're in the midst of it, when the weather's changing and life feels really crazy and out of control, it doesn't sweep us away. Right? So we start to recognize the rabbit hole. And this was that recognition for me of, hey, I need to pay attention. It's always in that transition that we're at our most vulnerable. Transitions are hard. And transitions are a red flag that I need to even pay closer attention, because that's when we could get pulled in, right? Very easily. Whether we're practicing meditation 40 minutes twice a day or not. So what is mindfulness? Mindfulness can also be called loving awareness. So you'll hear it interchangeably. And for some of you that might feel comforting, and for others it might feel like, oh, what does that mean? Right? So let's explain it. Essentially, mindfulness, a definition of mindfulness that feels really supportive to me, and especially to new students, is moment-to-moment awareness. It's paying attention in a particular way and noticing that desire to change things. And instead of wanting that or feeding it, it's inviting reality to be just as it is. So whether things are difficult or uncomfortable, we invite it in. Or loud, noise, the reality of life, just as it is. I can be with this too, just how it is. And I don't need to manipulate it or change it or improve it or anyone else. Now that doesn't mean that we give up. It doesn't. It's different. It's getting down through the thick of it and seeing things very clearly. Because the truth is, there's a lot of life that's completely out of our control. And we don't have to get so caught up in it. It doesn't have to entangle us or own us or control the way that we operate in the world. So it's recognizing that something's changed and there could be resistance there. And instead of turning away from it, that discomfort that comes up, typically with any change, we turn towards it. Okay? When we're developing mindfulness or loving awareness, or you could just call it awareness, there's two wings of it. So this illustration of the bird, you'll see quite frequently. So we develop mindfulness, but we also have to develop compassion. And that's where some of the hard work exists. So mindfulness, this moment-to-moment attention, really developing concentration and focus and resilience, right? That all kind of hovers in this wing of mindfulness, which leads to wisdom and insight, right? And this primordial space inside where we just know, right? How often do we turn away from that knowing? Because we're just not trusting it. We begin to develop this enormous capacity to trust that we can be with whatever's coming up, and we can still stay connected to that gut space, right? That inner knowing, this wisdom body, this clear seeing. Compassion. When we're training up in compassion, which is hard, we have to start with compassion for ourselves. There's a story I like to tell. Susan's heard this one before, but it's very compelling. The Dalai Lama was here, and he comes here often, and he meets with meditation teachers, senior teachers, my teachers. He meets with neuroscientists, he meets with psychologists, and he's very curious about how these wisdom practices, often from Buddhist cultures, are being used in the West because we've changed them, right? And he's curious to know where we as teachers are experiencing challenges or difficulties, what's working, what's not working. So in one of these meetings, and this was probably about 15 to 20 years ago, one of my teachers is Jack Kornfield, and he tells this story. And he said, they're all sitting in a room, and the Dalai Lama says, what is your biggest challenge in teaching these practices in a secular way to Westerners? What's the biggest challenge? And the overwhelming answer is that there was so much self-hatred that they were confronted with. Self-hate. That people were just so hard on themselves. And when this answer came through, the interpreter for him did not have a word in the Tibetan language. He didn't know what that meant. He didn't understand. It took him quite a long time to really understand what they were talking about, because it simply does not exist as strongly in other cultures. It's a cultural phenomenon, especially here in the United States. And we see it, especially we're having a film tomorrow night, as a matter of fact, at the FM Kirby Center. And it's a free film for our community on the epidemic of anxiety and how anxiety is just spiraling into, an out of control concern with our teenagers, especially and young adults, right? And so we see social media and the way technology, this digital age, has pulled us away from these inner practices, this inner knowing, and this overwhelming feeling that we're broken. And I'm sitting here and I'm telling you that you are absolutely not broken, and you don't need to be fixed. And we need to encourage everybody around us with those same lessons. You're not broken, and you don't need to be fixed. And stop paying attention to the culture that's telling you that. So that's where self-compassion starts. I'm not broken, and I don't need to be fixed. And I could develop this inner compassion so that I feel kinder to myself, that I'm not so hard. So when that self-critic comes up, I'm not listening to that voice. Because we all have the self-critic inside. So the compassion practices are just as important as the mind training practices. And this is the work of the heart. Okay, so we're going to work on that together too. And I'm going to show you how to start, where to start, why. Why we start is because what we need in this world, what I wholeheartedly believe, is more kindness. So the two wings of mindfulness. Mindfulness as natural presence. Mindfulness is a natural human capacity. It's how we're supposed to be in the world, moving through the world. It's just, think about this for a second. When I left my corporate job, it was 2007. 2007, which doesn't seem so long ago, right? Depending on how you look at it, was the year that the iPhone was released. Isn't that incredible to think about? That's not that long ago, guys. Our systems have not kept up with the pace of technology. We have not adapted. I don't know about you, but when I was a little kid, we had like 5 channels on the TV, right? We had to get up and change the channel, and there was more fuzz on the screen than actual people, right? So I grew up with Atari and all those things. I mean, and so think about your life. The system, the human body, has not been able to keep up. So it's pulled us out of this natural presence. We feel disconnected from it. We don't know where to find it. We don't trust that it's there. But I want to tell you, I want you to believe it, that mindfulness, natural presence, is a human capacity that exists within each of us. So anyone can relearn it. You could come back to it. You could trust that. It's there already. And what that does is it cultivates, it trains us up in these basic skills of paying attention, of noticing the beauty around you, of being tender. It's a picture of my grandmother. Of being open to life, to the sounds of the sea. Okay, so those skills can be trained up, but they're there already. You own that. If that's the only thing you take away from today, believe it. The 4 foundations of mindfulness is what we will weave through these practices and teachings over our next 4 sessions together. Okay? And these 4 foundations will open you to everything that we're talking about. And we start with the simpleness of mindfulness of the body. So the practice that we did in the beginning of our session today was a body-based practice. It was just feeling your feet against the floor, knowing that you're sitting in a chair and there's support there, right? Connecting and grounding to where you are in space and time right now. And I was doing a presentation in November, and it was the second investor pitch that I've ever done, and it was terrible. It was really bad. I'm good at a lot of things. I do not have a financial capacity to talk about anything. I'm learning though. I've been thrown into the fire. But this presentation was down at Lehigh University. It was very stressful. I walked into a room with like 50 people, mostly men, and I found myself in the front of the room completely disconnected from my body, completely out of body. And even with all of these practices, I had such a hard time connecting. I mean, and we find ourselves in those moments in our life where we're just out of our body. And the body just wants us to be invited in. And when we can land there, inside our bodies, there's a grounding energy. We could feel centered. And we could use these methods just to come back in. So I was lucky enough that for some reason they gave me the wrong lapel mic, or I don't know, something wasn't working. So they whisked me out of there as fast as I came in. And I was back in a back hallway. And the whole time the lady was changing my microphone out, I was grounding into my feet just to get connected again, right? So the more comfortable we get to these practices, the more we're able to access that. So the body practices are very important. What's also included in this foundation, this first foundation of mindfulness, is the breath. And that's where we start. And it's usually, and I say usually because 20% of people, so perhaps even a few of you in this room, will relate breathing to something traumatic that could have happened in their life. So I had asthma and allergies. It could be, we start thinking about trauma difficulty. But when I was a little kid, they would just give me Actifed and I would fall asleep, right? But it was traumatic because it made me feel like I was suffocating when the asthma would come on and you couldn't take those deep breaths. So when I first started yoga, I wasn't able to connect to the breathing practices. And it took me about 10 years to do so, which is why the body practices were so potent for me. So as we move along, if you notice difficulties coming up, you'll learn different strategies so that you can connect. But whether you're trying to connect to your feet on the ground or your seat in a chair or your spine reaching up, that's a body practice. Whether you're connecting to the breath, the inhale or the exhale, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, that's a body practice. And we soon start knowing and trusting that we can lean into those rhythms quite easily and land there when things feel like disconnected or overwhelming. So remember when I said in the meditation that the body just breathes on its own? Who did that feel? Who felt connected to that or supported by that? Anybody? Yeah. The body's breathing. Whether or not we're paying attention, the breath's moving in and the breath's moving out. And that trust becomes very supportive as we go through the practices. So if emotion's tied to that, if there's stories from your past tied to something that's coming up, know that the body will breathe, and you could just pay attention to the feet against the floor or your seat in the chair. Okay? The second foundation of mindfulness is mindfulness of feelings. We talked about the heart practices, the metta practices. Metta means loving kindness or loving friendliness. And there's practices around that. The compassion practices and the metta practices are very linked in to the second foundation of mindfulness. Because feelings are interesting and they're often connected to strong, sharp emotions. So in mindfulness of feelings, we start understanding that there's always a feeling tone. Always. And we can look in and see that perhaps there's an unpleasant tone that's inside for whatever reason. We don't have to know the reason why. Right? We might also find that there's a really pleasant tone inside. And again, there doesn't have to be a reason. So in a room full of women, I could remind you that we all have hormones, right? So we're already experiencing this. So there could be a negative tone in there or an unpleasant tone, and there's no reason for it. It's just there. And so it's extremely empowering to be able to look inside during this formal practice time and see that, wow, things might be a little unpleasant today, and I'm going to navigate the rest of my day from there. We could start making choices for ourselves when things are very pleasant and we have a little extra energy with that pleasant tone. And maybe we tackle those big projects that we've been putting to the side. What you'll also find is we spend a lot of time in this neutral space or territory. Right? And we could just get comfortable with it. We don't need the drama, right? Which so often we could be addicted to. So we'll work on that. Mindfulness of thoughts. Everything we do, the mind wants to be in control of. Every situation we're in, the mind wants to be in control of. Right? The mind is constantly judging and criticizing and creating stories. And some of those stories, quite frankly, aren't true. So we start looking in a really curious way and developing this capacity to know that the mind just sometimes thinks or remembers or imagines or draws its own conclusions to things. And people and situations and difficulties, right? We could go on and on. But the mind, that's the mind's job. And we could start noticing that we could watch the thoughts coming and going, just as we could watch feelings changing, or emotions coming and going, or bodily sensations coming and going. And we start trusting that everything we're experiencing is in a constant state of change. Impermanence. Nothing is impermanent, including the thoughts. So what makes the difficult thoughts stay, the thoughts that we ruminate over? the difficult emotions stay. What spirals us into this loop of thinking? It's when we get really attached to the thoughts that are there or the emotions that are there. There was a scientific study done just a few years ago, and they tracked neurologically how long it takes a strong emotion to move through consciousness, through the mind. Does anybody have any guesses? Say anger. We'll take anger. That's something we could all relate to. We can all relate to all the emotions, but that's another class. Right? 90 seconds. It takes anger to move through the mind, through the heart, through consciousness, through our systems. Now, I don't know about you, but I've been angry before, and it has stayed with me for weeks.
I was gonna say months.
Yeah, right. Months, sure. I'm still angry at an uncle for something, right? So you see where I'm going with this. So the only thing that prolongs anger from leaving us is our attachment to the stories that we create around the events that really pissed us off. We get attached to it, and it stays in our bodies. So I'll give you an extreme example of this bodily connection. If you look at soldiers coming back from war, and they're confronted with situations that we cannot comprehend, and they cannot comprehend. And so the mind blocks it out, and the body absorbs it. And that happens just so they survive the trauma that they've been exposed to. It happens to young children that are exposed to abuse and neglect. 1 in 4 adults have experienced significant trauma in their lives. 1 in 4. So a few of us in this room. Okay, so when we get really quiet sometimes, these things emerge, things that the body has been holding on to for a long time. And we learn how to be with that too. Okay? Mindfulness of thoughts, being the third foundation, naturally, all 3 of the first 3 foundations lead us to the 4th foundation of mindfulness. And it's mindfulness of mind states and this relation to experience, and that's exactly what we just talked about. So we start noticing that there's patterns and links in there. And that when a story comes up in my mind, I also notice that there's tension in the body or an ache in the heart. Okay? And not everything that comes up is related to the suffering of life. Because remember, every human life has both the joys and the sorrows. 50% of life will be full of beauty, and 50% of it will be hard. And knowing that everyone in this space, outside of this space, is confronted with the same plate. It connects us to our common humanity. And it starts building this big heart. Because the capacity of the heart is boundless. It is so much bigger than we give it credit for. And when we open to that possibility, it naturally happens. So what is meditation? And I'm going to move through these next slides a little quicker so we could get to the meditation at the end. Because we're running out of time. Isn't that crazy? An hour and a half seems spacious, and it's not. So meditation, every culture, every religion, every indigenous person on the planet has a practice that is a meditation. So my religion is, I'm Catholic. I grew up Catholic, I'm still a practicing Catholic. And I always think about the rosary and praying the rosary and how meditative that experience is and how relatable it is to some of the other practices I've learned from the Hindu faith or the Buddhist faith. Even when I sit in a Jewish temple, I have friends that are Jewish, and I hear them singing and chanting. It's a similar experience. So every culture has practices that are meditative. The insight practices, again, are a secular practice, and they teach us how to concentrate and calm the mind so that we can become more open to experience. These deliberate trainings will all train up attention and awareness. Whether we're doing the rosary or a prayer that we've learned or a chant that we've practiced since we're children. Even poetry has that unique kind of tone, has a meditative tone. Music, the symphony, right? So we could find these meditative practices not only in prayer and in different kinds of, I forget the word I'm looking for. We could also find this meditation practices out in nature, just finding rhythms and pace. You'll hear, is anyone here a runner? Right? Runners will often say, my runs feel meditative. Hiking, cycling, that sort of thing. All right? They awaken us beyond the conditioning of the mind. We all have conditioning. So remember that fourth foundation. We start noticing it. So when this happens, I feel this way. Or when this comes up, I'm feeling this in my body. Or when this thought comes in, I notice an ache in my heart. So once we start noticing the conditioning, it doesn't, that grip that it has on us kind of starts loosening up and opening. Judgment is a big one, right? Judgment comes up for every human being, right? So what's that judgment associated with? We start seeing really clearly into the thick of the matter. Again, revealing the nature of reality and just noting that there's so many different practices. We went over this quite a bit just to kind of remind you of what we're cultivating. These qualities that we're training up, right? Calm presence, wisdom, sympathetic joy, being able to experience joy that other people around us are having, even when we're in the thick of it, when we're in the muck of life. Can we experience joy? Yes, we can, right? Freedom. I knew that I had changed quite a bit when I finally trusted that I could remain calm with my father. Because he was so triggering for me. And that freedom rippled out in so many ways it would be hard to describe. But that's when I knew things had shifted dramatically. Because I was able to be with him. My father served 3 tours of duty in Vietnam. So lots of PTSD, lots of trauma, unresolved. Extremely reactive. And anytime I was around him, I felt reactive and protective and scared. And when I was able to just be with him in a way where I trusted that I could find my feet and stay grounded and open to him, just as he was, without expectations, I felt freedom for the first time in my life in his presence. So that's just an example of the freedom that comes from these practices. Consciousness, just so you know these words. Consciousness and awareness. Consciousness is the knowing that we can have experience. Knowing that we're having experience. So remember when we were talking about that third foundation of mindfulness, mindfulness of mind. I can watch the thoughts come in and out. I notice that they're changing. Who's watching? There's an element of a witness there. Consciousness knows. And that could be developed here. So we start knowing that, yes, all of these things could change, and there's something beyond that. And whatever you want to name it, if you want to name it the soul, whatever your faith asks you to look at it as, whatever view or lens you're looking through, we get more connected. So these practices, which sometimes people get really nervous with, because they feel like, oh, it's going to make me feel like, or question things as I know it to be true, or question my faith. No, it deepens your faith. It connects you to truths that maybe you've been perhaps struggling with, right? It's really beautiful. So we start seeing just some adjectives here to describe consciousness and awareness. So awareness we could use in two different ways. It could be a synonym for mindfulness or consciousness. So you could see how it's used. So as we're going through these next 4 lessons, I want you to start kind of opening to the possibilities of how you're interpreting the words and feel more comfortable that some of them are used interchangeably, right? But if we just land in that original definition of what we're doing here, is we're just trying to be more open and free in our lives and to each other, just as things are, right? And I'm going to start accepting that, hey, nobody's perfect, and there's suffering. And I could be with the suffering inside, and I could be with the suffering of the world in a more open way. I don't have to turn away, as hard as it may be. And in times like this, when the news is really hard to watch sometimes, we could remain open but still protect our hearts. Knowing that by just being still and quiet and working on this inner work, developing it, that we could be a gift to the world. And maybe that's the work we all need to be doing. Okay. So I'd like to do another practice. So let's stand up. We're going to do half the practice standing and then half the practice sitting. So I'm going to stay standing the whole time, and I'll tell you when to sit. There is a tool that I use and recommend, and it's called the Insight Timer. And some of you have it, especially if you've worked with me before. I always recommend it. The Insight Timer is free. There's so much information on it. But what I love about it the most, I think there's 35,000 guided meditations. Now you'll find everything on here. So you really kind of have to sift through it and figure out what you're comfortable with. But I'll make some recommendations because my teachers have information on here. But the timer is excellent, right? So this timer, right now it's preset for 12 minutes, but I'm just going to set it for 6 minutes. Okay? And you could set up intervals here. So for instance, if you were doing this on your own, you could set up in intervals of 3 minutes. So at 3 minutes you could hear a bell, and then at the end you would hear a bell. Now what the bells do, and you'll hear them in a moment, is the opening bell invites us to be here. That's all it means. And the closing bell brings us back, because we may have deepened into this state of being where things feel really open, right? So it just brings us back into the room, back into the day, back into our lives. Okay? All right. So standing up, I'd like you to stand with your feet hips distance apart. So your feet right underneath your hip bones. Good. And we're going to either place the hands on your belly, so you could place your right hand on your belly and then your left hand over, or you could just take them behind. Some of you might feel more comfortable here. So it's up to you. Okay? Stand up nice and tall and close your eyes. So I'm going to wait till these bells end, and then you'll hear the meditation bells chime in. And if you feel off balance with your eyes closed, standing, you could open the eyes and set the gaze down, softening it. Just tracking the tones as they dissipate and leave the room. Bring your attention into your feet, grounded against the earth, grounded against the floor. You could even gently shift back and forth or side to side, just finding this space of centering in your feet as they land heavy and rooted. Now bringing your attention to your hands resting against your belly. Just feeling the weight of the hands there. This gentle vibration of aliveness, of the hands resting. Any warmth that might be there, any coolness, just noticing. See if you could feel the breath down low and into the belly. You could even gently encourage the next inhale to deepen down low beneath the navel. See if you could relax this belly space as much as possible. Just spilling the belly out into the hands and encouraging the softness. Notice how the breath's coming in and out. And notice if there's still any lingering tension there in this belly space. Whatever your experience is, let it be so. Now gently release the hands. Encourage the eyes to open and very slowly, mindfully sit in the seat. Sitting with your feet grounded underneath your knees and feet about hips distance apart. A nice, tall, noble spine. Bring your right hand to your heart, and now your left hand resting on top of your right hand. Close your eyes or soften your gaze. And bring all of your attention now to the hands resting on this heart space. Noticing the expansion and contraction of the breath moving in and out. and noticing this comforting touch of the hands, this comforting touch of just resting your hands against your heart is a self-compassion practice. Naturally inviting in hormones that make us feel connected and comforted. Encourage all of your attention to rest here for the next few moments in quiet. Inviting the tones back in, and in your own time, just releasing the hands down to your legs, allowing the tones to completely settle before opening your eyes. And then opening your eyes and inviting this light back into the space. The first half of the practice just now, the standing practice, connecting to this belly space. Remember, I want you to think this space is actually called the hara in Japanese culture. And I love that word, hara. And it's this connection to the earth, right? So in that culture, they believe that this umbilical space, homes or houses our wisdom, that primordial wisdom that I spoke of earlier, this inner knowing. And we say it in our culture, we say all the time, I had this gut feeling, right? But so often in this culture, we get disconnected from this space, especially women, right? We hold it in tight. So I'd like you to come back to this space before we meet again and just invite it to soften and open. And notice how the more you do that, the more you're able to access it, you feel more earthy and grounded. Okay? When we sat and brought our hands to our hearts, that's where I like to begin with the compassion practices, this self-compassion. In the portal, you'll get a journaling prompt, and it'll be related to that practice. Okay? So I would also invite you to just pick up a journal for this experience and free write as much as you can. Even today, later on, even for just 5 minutes, set your timer and just write and see what comes up. Right? But we'll offer prompts along the way as well. I don't want to keep you guys. We went about 5 minutes over. I know that you're all really busy. Okay? But if you want to stay behind and ask a few questions, I'm going to hang out. So feel free to do that too. But if you need to run, I understand. Okay?
The portal, how do we get into it?
You'll get instructions from
Okay.
Sarah. Yep. Once the video is loaded tomorrow,
Okay.
we'll get the instructions out to you. Sarah Kralik is our COO at Studio B, and she handles all of this logistical stuff for me.
Okay.
So if you have any problems at all, feel free to reach out to her directly. She's just awesome. All right? Thank you all so much.